Welcome to Cut Daisies and Unicorns, and we are in the studio. We're getting some stuff done today because we have just so many things that we were planning and going through, and trying to be able to tackle subjects of wide varieties. And so we're back again for a full episode.
Beep, beep,
Right.
beep. That's my wide load.
That's a wide load,
Wide load beep.
not in reverse load.
Well, it could be that too.
Oh, yes. So,
Do you remember back in back in the day when on vinyl records, if you played them backwards, there was backward masking, and then people were all like getting worked up about there are messages from the devil on these records.
and some of them were not even just like metal groups that were trying to but they would even say go back and listen to Chicago's album. I mean, like there were some odd ones.
Yeah, totally odd.
Yeah, you're like, really? I mean, you think that Chicago's trying to send a hidden messages about worshiping Satan or something? Like, yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, everybody, but yeah, those were common in the threads of putting that stuff out there back in the day. But doesn't it also ruin your vinyl when you're trying to I mean, I know that there's probably a way to do it and play it in reverse, but I don't know.
Well, I think what you end up doing is you just end up having the record player on and set the needle there, and then you use your fingers to wind it backwards. So, I mean, the needle's doing the same thing. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I just made me think about in reverse.
Right.
Yeah.
Masking. Subliminal messages, all kinds of stuff that people have reported are hidden in these vinyls. So,
It's like people are wanting to be protective as parents.
mm-hmm.
And then how does that help when you think everybody's out to get you?
Right.
Yeah.
So do we have any subliminal messages that we're sending people
Nope.
during Cut Daisies and Unicorns?
All of our messages are overt.
Mm-hmm.
Not,
I would say we put them right out there.
Not covert.
Right.
Yep. If you wonder what we think, just stick around because we're going to tell you.
Right.
Yep.
There's nothing hidden here.
It's true.
We're going to be out front with you. So, Steve, how you doing today?
I'm wore out.
Yeah.
We just got done shooting the last episode that everyone's seen, and this is going to be coming out just right before the first week in December.
Right.
And so I always have to recover from our podcast recordings.
Right.
Like Amy plans on me not having much energy around the house in the evening.
On Thursdays.
And typically when we shoot on Thursday, unless we have to shoot earlier because we know something's coming up.
Right.
But
yeah, so today has been a busy day in the Cut Daisies and Unicorns podcast studio.
yeah. And so if you're like wondering, how come Steve's energy is so low? Well, I picked up a common cold. I've actually over-the-counter tested. I don't have COVID, but I do have something that slightly resembles a bronchial infection. And so that's why my voice is in tune with a fine Johnny Cash. And like we said before, even though it's a double session of us cooking up some Cut Daisies and Unicorns frivolity, Phil has not been harmed or damaged in any way of shooting this. And actually, he's committed to a dose of emergency immune system booster following this time. And when I hack, you'll notice that I'm blowing chunks in the opposite direction.
Right. So his aerosol spray is going that direction towards the wall.
Yep. Splattered
That
it
way.
against the wall. It's true. Yeah. So, but I mean, like, as far as like happiness or like anger or like being in a bad place, I mean, like, I don't feel like that.
Right.
I just, you know, I don't know if you've picked up on just there are inconveniences to life. And, you know, like one of the things I kind of celebrated on my drive down, I'm like, hey, you know what? I know I'm alive because I'm not feeling well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bad way to be able to live out your life. You're like, I know I'm alive,
Yeah.
you know, and so it just is one of those things where I'm like, and this too shall pass.
Yeah, that is funny that when you're talking about how sickness or what I would even say is pain, like helps you to realize that you actually feel something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so and to me you can get addicted to, so this would be where adrenaline junkies, people who are trying,
yeah,
like, they're
yeah.
like, that's how you know you're alive. Like when you're jumping out of a plane, and we talked about Michaela, your daughter, who, likes to do that. And I'm not saying that she's a junkie, but if there's something that says this is how you know you're alive.
Right.
So part of that, I mean, I recognized it when I got tattoos. And that pain
Yeah.
is chosen. Like, you're like, hey, but I can see how people could get addicted to it because it is like that. Your body is telling you, like, this can be exhilarating.
Huh.
To me, it's kind of like a roller coaster.
Okay.
And you're at the top, and like, that there's going to be this drop that occurs. You don't know, maybe if it's the first time you've been on it, you don't know what it's exactly going to be about, but you know that there's going to be feelings there.
Yeah.
And the drop in the, that first, usually there's a drop right at the beginning, towards the beginning at least.
Yeah.
That will send those, belly feelings, like you're dropping in elevation and you're dropping quickly.
I know. And it makes me wonder why. Why would any sane person want to do that? I mean, I've done it plenty of times, but
Right.
I've questioned my own sanity about that too. Yeah.
But I think it goes back to me for, we've talked about this too. I mean, kind of suppressed feeling and emotion.
Right.
And so there's a lot of the things like that pain that I can be a little bit more geared towards, like, because I think that there is then an outlet for those feelings.
Huh.
It's kind of like, when I listen to, I mean, there's sad songs.
Yeah.
And that generates emotion,
Yeah.
For me. And my wife's always like, why do you listen to it? Like, this song is so sad. Like, I mean, like, right. But that's kind of the thing that helps me feel as well. So,
Yeah.
Now I don't want to, just listen to, sad music. I mean, I also like things that are uplifting as well, but that also brings emotion, but just the other side.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think that's it's an interesting, kind of psychological stuff that's happening there as well. But
Yeah.
yeah,
it really is, and I think that even how people end up like using experience to be able to get outside of themselves. I mean, whether it's reading a book, watching a movie, finding themselves in a different story. Right now, the whole experience is just really interesting to me because right now I feel like not only do I feel like I'm in a cave, but I'm like, my earmuffs are just like, my ears must be full of liquid or something like that because my earmuffs and like my ears, and I'm like, wow. And then when I think of a cave, I think of Gregory Alan Isakov, who actually is coming to Chicago in March,
wow.
March 18th.
Just for fun?
At the Englert, I think, theater. No, that's he is such a beautiful performer. Oh man, I do. I love it. I think about, like, there's times when you're talking about connecting emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the parts of like, do you ever go through like an inventory of looking backwards and stuff like that? To to find out where you are,
Yeah.
to see like, deciding on where you're going to go ahead, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think for me, there's the, um, I'm a part of kind of a recovery thing, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so that kind of somewhat forces me to we talk about inventories,
Sure.
and there's lots of inventories that are a part of that, not just a moral inventory, but there's the system, the recovery we're a part of is also has a spiritual inventory as
Okay.
well.
Yeah.
So you're going through a lot of that's saying, hey, it's time, look back. What are the things that are kind of at the root right now? What are the things that are affecting, whether it's resentments or pain or whatever? Like, identify it, bring it out, so that you're not then saying, hey, my life's going to be built on this resentment.
Yeah.
Or or on this struggle or this pain.
Yeah.
And so it's always good, in that, recognizing that, to bring it out and say, it's time to face it. It's time to talk about it. It's time to, bring it to
Nice.
a community that's also going to say, I'm doing that too, and we can do it together.
Yeah. You don't have to be alone.
Right.
I just think with COVID that loneliness is one of the things a lot of people have had to face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a big one. I was even, so I'm on LinkedIn. I mean, pretty much, I don't visit often, but somewhere towards it would have been fall of 2020, there was somebody I was connected to on LinkedIn, and they just had to say, hey, I'm committed. I'm reaching out to everybody who I'm connected to on here and just asking about, kind of, where are they at with loneliness, but they even talked about Zoom fatigue, like video conferencing fatigue.
Sure.
And how it's it does play on your kind of your whole psychological thing, when yes, you're connecting with people, but also not the way that feels normal.
Right. Yeah.
Like, because you can talk to people over video, and that's good. I mean, like, family wise, it's good to be able to connect, especially if you're not in the same, physical location. It's good to be able to see them, but
Yeah.
it's not the same.
Yeah.
You can't hug them. You can't, like, you can't converse in the same way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of that's even being done now out of, well, we're not out of COVID, but out of that first year of the pandemic, they're also studying it now and saying, what toll did this take on people, that people are still maybe not even understanding that it did take a toll.
Yeah. Well, I think that, it really does lend us into the place where we start, taking a look at it and see, man, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Zoom calls. And that's why I would rather talk on the phone than text. And, I mean, I'm cool with video chat if that's, the thing that people want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to lie. Haven't been on a lot of Zoom meetings in the last year and probably 3 months, and I don't miss it.
Right.
But then that's what tires me out about being around people and stuff. And so I'm like, I need to recover from my interface with other humans.
Which is the way where you say you feel drained, after, being like our podcast, it's us most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, especially like, except for last week, we had Adam, but
Yeah.
but most of the time it's us. That means we spend a lot of time talking.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of energy spent.
Yeah.
That you're speaking, and not in the way that, like, if you're working. And when I'm working now, I mean, I work in my office, and I'm usually the only one there. Maybe my dog comes and parks on the couch or something.
Right.
But
Right. Hey, Dodge.
right.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, I mean, like it is different.
Oh yeah. And I think that my mom and I were actually talking about this when we were together for the funeral gathering.
Yeah.
And she noticeably, she's like, yeah, COVID has changed you. She just recognizes. I mean, like, and we've talked about this in the past, but I pretty much interface with two people in my world, and I think 2 episodes ago we dove into that, and so, but you know what, I find that I end up having phone calls and talking to people on the phone, whether it's counseling or giving advice, and people checking in on areas of expertise, and I still do some leadership coaching, not in an official capacity where I get a paycheck for it, but
Right.
definitely. And I was paying attention to that the other day, and how that really, with time spent, I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, like 10 years ago, as a director of worship, I didn't know and have the experience of what it led up to and the amount of things. And so I was like, how do these things pop in my head? Oh, well, it's okay.
So how does your mom see, what does she think has changed about, I mean, do you think it's with some of the more limited interactions with others, or?
I think she picks up on and we could ask her to send in her notes. But I think since I typically test out as a 50-50 between extrovert and introvert, I think I'm weighed probably more into introvertedness. I think that she can pick up on the energy cues, and that there's just really a highly identifiable part of the stimulation and interaction and the toll that it'll take. And so I get tired of, I'm used to having a TV on, or there's noise and and stuff like that, but the energy of exchange of what takes place when there's a lot of people around, that just is really woo 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 woo. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, and I like that you even brought up the kind of the dynamic of introvert, extrovert. I think sometimes when it's spoken of, it's like you're either or, and you talked about a blend. And I think that that's more realistic as far as more of what I experience with people, and when you're talking about introvert, extrovert, is that there's more of a blend, and you don't have to be like, well, I'm an absolute introvert, or absolute extrovert, can there be a blend?
Oh, in the testing that you can do online,
Mm-hmm.
like at Psychology Today or whatever, there's no question. I mean, like, they literally labeled me a chameleon. And when I was talking at the time to the counselor that I was seeing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I have the answer, but I'd really like you to tell me what you see me as. And he's like, I pick you to be one of the highest functioning introverts I've ever met. And I'm like, that's so amazing, because I test out as a chameleon. He just laughed. He's like, yeah, that makes sense. Because at the time, the demand was that I needed to interface and interact with other people. But introvert and extrovert isn't about being shy and bashful, or about being entertaining and boisterous.
Right.
It's how are you energized?
Mm-hmm.
And solitude, like solitude is energizing. And then you wrap that around with the physicalness of what your work schedule, or what your social calendar, or what, and all these things. I mean, I can be by myself for a whole day in the pottery studio and come home and be tired.
Right.
But I mean, literally, I've been standing on my feet, walking around and doing different tasks for 11 or 12 hours. Well, it's physically draining, it not necessarily people wise, but then how do you get, and it's like you have to let your body rest.
Yeah, because I've always tested as far as that goes on an extrovert scale, but I also do have some introvert tendencies, which then was always for me I always like originally was like, hey, like well, because I do gain a lot of energy from, like, especially not just being around people, because that doesn't always bring me energy.
Right.
But it's really kind of engaging with people is where I, like on a deeper level than just just being around. But I gain more energy from, like, being in conversation with people. And that to me is the difference. But I also then find myself, like, sometimes, like, I don't want to be around people. And so that's also, like, so to me there is some of that gets played in, and to me I like that there's a balance and not like you have to be this all the time. Because I also wouldn't be, I mean, in social situations, I'm not all like I'm not always like trying to be a center of attention like you would think an extrovert has to be.
Yeah.
But because I think that's also then a balance of it. But
Yeah.
I don't know. So that for me, I think it is helpful to highlight that in this is that you also, you don't have to be this, and you don't have to try to chase after being that either.
Right.
If you're
right.
like, oh, I really want to be an extrovert, so that means I've got to shoot for that.
Yeah.
And maybe as a chameleon, like you're like, okay, now I'm going to take this on, or I'm going to take this on, and and try to be that more. But I don't know. Yeah,
I use the term chameleon in the same way that I would use the term bridge builder. I'm definitely a mediator, moderator, bridge builder type, pulling people of opposing sides together to gain the view of the other and build the bridge for them to be able to accomplish a goal that isn't necessarily driven by either one, but for the sake of the greater cause has to be accomplished. And so, that's, and I find great joy in being able to do that. And so I think when we're talking about knowing yourself, then we move into the place for our listeners to say, just really, it's okay for you to be you. And what you bring to the table, it really does matter. I mean, a lot of people can get in their heads and be like, well, I don't have anything that really matters to bring to the table, or, and stuff like that. And I actually go back to, I think people who are older than me, I find great wisdom in them. I love to hear the stories that they have to tell, the lessons that they're learning, and things like that. On the flip side, people who are younger than me, they don't make me shake my head and think, oh my God, what's this world coming to? If the world's left to you, there's no hope for the future, And no, I mean, like, I find great energy out of the younger generation too. And since my dad passed when I was young, I mean, 25 years, I was in my 20s. Didn't have that, or don't have that male figure next generation, really to be able to draw from as far as wisdom from that. But that doesn't mean that it has to be a male figure. It doesn't mean B, that it can't be, from others who are on the path. And actually, if there is a part of missing, I think one of the things of moving to Chicago, one of the things that I miss the most is I miss my interaction with Stan Greenwood and Dick Dorn, two gentlemen in their 70s that are artists in their own reserve and right. I spent a lot of years with Stan playing bass in the worship band. And Stan and Diane, oh my gosh, what conversationalists, and and things like that, just to be able to hear the story. And one thing was guaranteed: if Stan and Diane and I were in a room, I would always be learning something new from their life that they had lived out. I mean, just fantastic. But, but again, in the spec of, this life that I've lived, I haven't lived a long time where I'm at. So I'm just looking forward to who are the people that I'm going to pick up along the way, and, just be able to build those relationships and be able to learn, and to be able to grow from that. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I like how you went forward and backward, right? So you can learn from people who have lived longer and have different life experiences because they've lived longer, but you also look back and say, there's some new generations, like some of the younger generations that you're like, maybe we don't always, we're not always thinking the same, but you also can learn from that.
Yeah.
Goes back to our being lifelong learners, that you're learning from people no matter, how old or how young, that you can still learn from their perspective, and because they're going to see things differently than you and I see them. So it's a learning process. And are you in a place where you're saying, I'm willing to learn even from somebody who hasn't lived, the experiences that I have?
Well, and I think too, it's probably the reflection of a grandpa, that's coming into being. I've never been a grandpa before, but it allows me to live my past life over again, in that I can identify when I was Micah's age and having children. And so to be able to watch him navigate that, and, kind of the series Fringe, to be able to get to be an observer, that from the peripheral or from the outside, just being able to move into a place, to be able to observe, to watch. I won't be imposing. I'm not that grandpa,
Right.
But available, and available for conversation. I think my attention span during COVID has shortened, for whatever reason too. I know that's a flashback to the question of, hey, how have you, but I think, like, I'm probably good in conversation for about 12 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then and maybe it's ADHD or, some
Switching topics or
it's horrible. I'm horrible on this podcast as far as like bounce. And actually, when we were back for the funeral, I heard my aunts were talking about the podcast and stuff like that, and they were going on, and my Aunt Linda was just saying, yeah, I just love how Steve goes off on a rampage, and then we got Phil just reeling him in and bringing him back to, hey, is this what you were really saying, and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure that probably complaints from Mike Gathercole and Bill Clark is like, yeah, you don't even answer the questions that Phil asks you. I mean, like, why is Phil even asking a question, and stuff like that. And so anyway, I just like, just all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody's going to find complaints no matter what, so.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've, and that's what we've talked about as far as the, looking at, even at the close of season 4, like, we're not there yet, but this is episode 7. And that means at the, end of every episode, and this is going to kind of be, our first full year into it at the end of season 4, so 4 seasons in a year. And then we're going to do some evaluation. We're going to say, what does it look like? What do we need to shift or change into? Do we need to rebrand? All of that. All of those things are always questions that we're also going to, face, but it's at the end of the season, even at the end of the year.
Yeah. Looking
at it and saying, what should we do?
Perfect timing. Right. And another thing too is, do you, like, I guess, like, to me, psychologically, I'm asking, we're watching Yellowstone season 4 right now. And so, like, we got done. They were brilliant the first night they released 2 episodes, which was a 2-hour premiere, kind of thing. And then, well, yeah, this last week, then, episode 3 was there. And Amy looked at me and she's like, I wish there was another one. And I'm like, yeah, that's what we're binge culture, So like as much as people are complaining and saying, well, and by complaining, I just mean, it's probably the wrong word. Maybe it's better to say, hey, some of the feedback we get, there's people who've told me I won't even turn on your podcast because it's over 30 minutes long. Like and talk about attention deficit, I mean, like people are like, yeah, if I see YouTube videos that are over 12 minutes, I'm not like diving into that.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of the, like somebody, they said, well, all you're doing is talking. What did you want us to do? I mean, like that's what we're going to do. I mean, whether we have a guest or not we're going to talk. This is a conversation podcast. This isn't
right.
Like we're not going to do tricks for you.
Well, and I mean, probably the closest thing that we got to like, living outside and, is when we did the cooking.
Right.
Which, man, note to self, I still have to get that live show and the cooking videos up on our YouTube.
Right.
I forgot all about that. But we're not here to sell product.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, to be able to get followers, what they're doing is they're focusing on a product and they're talking about a product.
Right.
I mean, we are generalists when it comes to culture and conversation, in and around that. So, if people aren't into it, they're not into it. We do have, I think we have a couple sweet spots.
Mm-hmm.
We knock it out of the park when it comes to talking about fringe. And I think our exchange in regards to those things is highly entertaining.
Yeah.
And so people enjoy that. I think the other thing that we do well, that I just came up with the label on the playlist, is life lessons. I think that there's a lot to be offered from our perspective of what we have lived out.
Yeah.
And give that as an opportunity for people to be able. But then you move into packaging, and packaging as far as obviously people don't want to be mansplained to the whole time, and then the other part is people can only take the the father figure role of hey, quit quit harping on me about this and this and this, so. There's a lot of different ways that we could go, and certainly as much as Adam even pointed out that he was doing some research for us, as we go. And I mean, it just, I think with where we're at in our stages, we're doing the best we can. So we'll just keep doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can bet that we'll probably have different things that we'll change into, and
yeah.
And, things will transform, evolve, as we say, through the process of doing this, time after time.
Now, just to be clear, you're not saying that you're coming out of the closet as a transgender woman.
No.
So the transformation you speak of has to do with the podcast will evolve, transform.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and we only have the ability to have the content. And why I brought that up is because we're talking about Matrix, the 4th movie, and the people who wrote The Matrix, when they wrote it in the beginning, they were men, but now have come out of the closet and have become transgender women.
Right.
And so for you on the other side hearing this and wondering, what's the joke all about? Really? What is the joke? Well, I mean, there was no joke. It's just saying transformation can mean different things to different people.
Right. Yeah, and then personal transformation, and I mean, and that doesn't always have to mean gender switching.
Right.
I mean, hopefully everybody is in a process of constant transformation.
Yeah.
Evolution and change that's happening within your perspective and the way that you view the world around you. Hopefully that's changing. And when we sit and talk is going to be hopefully a reflection of the things that are happening, with our own personal, but together conversation. So
Yeah, and I think there's another part to this project with which it just definitely within proximity, it makes it easy for us to create a document through this technology of what we're living through at the time. I mean, this is like an open story diary book,
mm-hmm.
Except we're talking about it.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, so where should we go next, Steve?
We can go anywhere you want, Phil. We can go anywhere you want.
Well, I mean, I know as we have been considering at least the last couple of episodes, we always try to, we're shooting for a time that's less than, the 2 hours that we've had it at some of our episodes. But we also feel like if we're not offering something, then what's the point as well? So, I mean, through, like, we can sit here and just talk about nothing for, half hour, 45 minutes
beneficial.
to an hour. That wouldn't, it's not beneficial for us, and we wouldn't want to just put out, hey, we just had a 30-minute conversation, and like Seinfeld, it's a show about nothing. Like, our podcasts are not going to be podcasts about nothing either.
Although, now that you brought up Seinfeld, maybe we should just do a podcast about nothing. It seemed to be a real hit to the American populace.
It's true. Yeah.
Quotable quotes.
Have you, has that been a show you've been trying to rewatch, or?
So I picked up all the seasons at the Goodwill, and I have watched through the first season.
Okay.
And so working through it. I ask myself this question when I go to turn on media in the studio, and what I do is I say, Steve, are you sad? Do you need some comedy? I'm like, well, I'm not sad. Okay, so comedy it is not.
Yeah, I go through that too. I mean, we were watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
That's dark. Dark humor.
It's dark humor,
yeah.
Right? I mean, but sometimes it's just funny too.
Yeah.
But so that's one of the that's a show that it's kind of in my often cycling back around to. I mean, and that's a show that they're still continuing. I mean, I think the new season's coming out pretty soon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I mean, like they said we don't plan to continue to, like, we're going to plan to continue this show just because, like, to me it's always, that's also a show that yes, there's kind of a storyline, but also it's like you could jump in at any point and you're like,
oh, yeah.
I haven't missed much.
No.
There's some of those stories and even characters, side characters that'll, bop in and out. And if you watch it in the later seasons, like Rickety Cricket, like he, first season, I think it was first season, he was a priest. And it just popped in, and then it was kind of like, and then what they did with him, is just kind of humorous as far as along. But so of course, if you see him, in the later seasons, you're like, that guy was a priest. Yeah, he was a priest in the, so that's part of the progression of some of the characters, side characters. But other than that, it's.
Rupke had a Christmas ritual,
Yeah.
which was to watch the Christmas episode of It's Always Sunny, and that was that was her thing that she really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but
well,
so I mean, so those are like when we're talking about our stuff that we're gonna put out is, you're gonna find some of the similarities of who we're always gonna be, and then you'll also find some of the things what we'll blend into. And,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was so interesting too, as we go further along, where like when people are like, oh, you have a podcast, I'm like, yeah, and just know that like what you're hearing is like, I don't always believe everything I say. It is a willful entry into suspending reality, and I'm just crazy enough that I can flip a switch and go there, But I'm like, but if you find topics that you like, there's a playlist, so you don't have to weave through or wade through like, oh, I do want to hear the life lesson ones, and so you can go and be like, yeah, we can learn a life lesson from that.
Right.
Hey, so if you were going to be a prophet, back in the day, as it was told to me, prophets would forth tell, and like looking down the road. If you could look down the road and say, "Hey, what are we going to be facing in 2022?" What things come to your mind, whether they're heavy, whether they're light and frivolous? I mean, that doesn't matter. But like, have you been thinking about the future? Have you been divining into the future to say, what do I need to be prepared for as the future comes at me in 2022?
Yeah, it's always a good question. Even the way you present that would be a like dinner conversation piece.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, what do you when you're looking forward?
I could see that conversation over a French loaf with spaghetti and a glass of red wine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for me, and we brought it up, Adam mentioned it last episode, was about the cryptocurrency.
Okay.
And I think that there's already a big conversation about it. I mean, it's not always mainstream, but to me, there's something about the decentralization of power. And so we've we've seen it in different generations as they've grown up, is that there starts to be a more skeptical society of long-term institutions, because when the longer you're in an institution, the more power structure you have there. And for somebody who's then comes in and like, yeah, I don't really like power structures, and I don't like power, where it's very much like top down. Not everybody has equal say here, and so with that, if you're questioning institutions and you're questioning centralized power, and you're saying we need to figure out a decentralized system, and sometimes that means people saying what systems do we have to take out, like what systems are we going to go after in order to figure out a better conversation. And so cryptocurrency at least comes in and says, hey, there's decentralized. Like, nobody is in control of driving. Well, I mean, I guess people can drive, price, as we talked about Elon Musk, if he talks about Dogecoin, like, it's going to jump.
Right. Yeah.
Just like stock prices.
Yeah.
But stocks are even centralized power. So, but even considering all of that and saying, there's a conversation that's being had, and it's going to be brought to the forefront about what does more of a decentralized structure look like. Our governmental structure, right, with Congress and all of the powers that are found there, executive power, judicial power, legislative power, all of those ones are at play, and people are more, if you look at Congress, you've seen the disapproval numbers of Congress that have been continuing to drop and drop and drop. Like, Congress isn't popular. Like, it's not popular, to be in that system.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to join, or no one's going to say, hey, I'm going to run for president or Congress or whatever, because then I can be popular. No, you find that even though our last election, a ton of people came out and voted, And they always look, like, President Biden, right? He had a ton of people who came out and voted. Now, some of those people who were voting for Biden weren't voting for Biden, they were voting against Trump.
Yeah.
The same thing when you're looking at Trump, right? Some people weren't voting for Trump, they were voting for maybe a political, more of the political agenda instead of a person.
Right.
And so you're like, there's lots of questions on that whole structure right now. Like, you're finding generations of people who are, very, they don't trust government. They don't trust it. I mean, I know Gen X is very, moved away from a lot of decentralized, structures. So
Yeah.
I don't know. So to me, I think it's a topic that for sure, is already kind of occurring, has occurred, but I think will become a little bit more. We're going to get some of that coming up as well, especially when you're looking at 2022. That means sometime towards summer, fall of 2022, you're already going to get the political process starting up for the 2024, presidential vote. So that's already start. I mean, they start that early and often.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the topics that I think are important. I mean, that are at least would get us to that. And this is where, we also had the conversations about a new world order. There's somebody who's still trying to pull strings in the background. And people are going to be like, oh, well, we should have more decentralized, like more of an international understanding than just a national understanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's going to lead to bigger questions as well. Like, if we're looking at an international, conversation versus just what's in the best interest of the United States.
Huh.
And I think those are, big questions to have as well. I know that show in news, what it was something, the one that they show the clip of, like, is the United States the greatest nation on the earth, and and there would be lots of people in the United States who said, yes, this is the greatest nation in the world, but what are we the greatest in? Energy consumption, resources of consumption. Like, but what are we really the greatest in? And I think that conversation as well has already, it's been playing, and like, it's for some people sacrilegious to be able to question that we're not the greatest. And it's like, but I don't know. So some of those questions, I think, again, like, this is things that rattle around.
Yeah.
I think when you're looking at the arts, and whether it's music, television, film, other for music, that there's great conversation that says, how can we not just recycle the old, but to actually create something new? And because I think that some people are always quite, like, a lot of the movies that are made are recycled. It's recycled material. They're trying to rewrite it, rewrite some of the scripts, but
Yeah.
lots of things that are recycled. What's it look like to create something new? And if you're creating something new, then you've got to worry about, like, well, how are we going to get an audience for this? Because it's not the old. Like, a lot of people they're bringing in different iterations of Spider-Man now, and the new Spider-Man movie coming out in December. They're bringing in some of the old as well, and like, they're like, okay, so nostalgia, and that's drawing an audience. Superheroes are drawing, but what does it mean to create something new?
Yeah. Yep.
And that, to me, I think is always should be, brought up as, no, we need to have a conversation about that as well. Like, what does it mean to create something new, something that people haven't seen, they haven't heard, and even if people are like, oh, well, that's different. Well, different doesn't mean bad. It means I'm not familiar with it, but let me let me get used to it. Let me understand it. So I don't know.
Well, it's really interesting too, as you bring that up, that you're talking transformation, which is change. You're talking about, new, which is birth giving. You're talking about things that are different. And you and I have had private conversations about that. As I feel like I'm growing older, I feel like I get comfortable in my familiar. And, talking about how, like, bumping out of the familiar, like there were things in my past life that I would choose things that I didn't like because I recognized that there were people who weren't like me, and they would appreciate the things, and they liked the things that I didn't necessarily like. This is in song selection for worship. And I still, to this day, when somebody gets a hold of me from Gloria Day, they'll be like, man, we just miss how you pick songs. And, it just, and of course that goes into my divining of the future of being able to draw in and say, hey, what do I need to be prepared for? That kind of thing. But also it was a personal bias, making sure that I personally wasn't biased towards only the things that I was interested in. But there's a part of me in this conversation, I want to be like, hey, yeah, something different. Hey, yeah, something new. Hey, yeah. And then in application, I'm like, oh, you mean we have to do this work? Oh, you mean that changes the schedule in my week? Oh, you mean that? I mean, like, and I'm like, whoa. I'm like, I don't know. And then there's a part when we talked about digital versus analog, which actually I think is a really, really great episode that we've done together. So to our listeners, go back and listen to digital versus analog versus digital. It just is a really great thing on machining and all the things. But then there's the nostalgia part of, oh man, I really like that, and there, just because it's old doesn't mean it needs to be thrown away.
True.
But I do think Hollywood takes a cheap, short path for all this reboot crap. And again, I mean, Steven Spielberg, West Side Story, why?
Right.
Come on, Steven. You are a talented individual. You do not need to reboot West Side Story. We can take West Side Story at face value and enjoy West Side Story that was done in the mid 60s or early 70s.
And it was still good, and it would still be good if you rewatched it.
It stands.
Right.
It stands on its own. No problem at all.
Right.
No problem at all. And those are the, like, as much as the new push in Star Wars is, and with Mandalorian and, just different, which Mandalorian is shot so well. And like its story development, all of those things, very, very, very well done. I'm still taking episode 4 as my favorite. And I know that all the Star Wars fans are like, no, Empire Strikes Back. That is the awkward. But I just love how it's not polished. But again, that's my personal bias to life. I just love the not polished parts. To me, and that goes to recordings. Shout out to Mike Lauer and Josh Crawford. Those guys had me listen to Muse. The first time I've ever heard the group Muse, it was Josh Crawford and Mike Lauer.
Yeah.
But I was riding in this morning, and on the radio station they were playing the new Muse tune, and I could hear it. I could hear it in the bass, and I could hear it in the voice of the singer. I'm like, oh, this has got to be Muse, and it was. But I think in looking back too, that's the beautiful part about the pandemic. Man, artists got time to create, and create at a level whether it was in reflection of how they felt about the current state of affairs, but some of this stuff, this new stuff that's dropping in the market is just absolutely good. And so familiar artists, but I mean new material, and that's a good thing. So I don't know. I like it.
So what are you thinking about as far as the looking into 2022 and beyond, and what are the things that whether they're heavy or light?
Yeah. So I got a big day coming up in January.
Yeah.
I'm going to be 55 on the 5th.
Right.
So I got a 555, and I'm actually going through reflection of, do I put a pin in my timeline and make some major changes? What am I willing to really commit to as far as major changes? And so I've been wrestling with that probably for the last couple of weeks, and thinking about that. What does 2020 have to hold? What does it look like if I put a pin in my timeline and say, there's some major changes that I want to have happen? Certainly we talked about the sale of the houses coming up, and and different things like that. But then I back up to, accomplishing, and what does culture throw our way? And quite frankly, I don't want to be heavy, and I don't want to be pessimistic, but I think I see dark clouds coming, and I don't want to be that guy.
You mean as far as culture? Or?
I do, in culture. I'm concerned for humanity as we continue to traverse the next couple of years. Do I think there's going to be a civil war in the U.S.? I don't really think so, but man, we've got the powder keg that it could happen. And so, how to do that? What I also know is that people who have their minds made up about certain things, it doesn't matter what you do. And so then I try to balance that out with hopes for dreams and realities and things like that. So, prioritization, one of the things that I think about is that I really probably end up need to go into scheduling. Do I shut off the TV and not have shows playing in the background? And then what do I commit to as far as personal growth? Whether it's listening to other podcasts, whether it's, we're heading into winter, so book reading will go up a little bit in my life. So there are those things, but I got different projects that are completed, so then you head into the new projects and stuff like that. But concerning culture, I get really just concerned, just really concerned. And so artificial intelligence aside, and the taking over of the world by robots and stuff like that,
Machines.
not really worried about that. As far as the weekly alien invasion, report that comes out weekly here, that's all tongue in cheek.
Right.
I really don't see an alien invasion occurring.
Right.
In 2022, especially, I think we're going to be enough of a hot box that I think aliens are like, you know what? There's probably better places to explore.
Right. Or maybe they're thinking, hey, they're going to kill themselves pretty soon, so we're going to take over once they've all killed themselves.
Yeah. Why even get into an engagement?
Right. Yeah. We can still inherit their property, once everything's gone.
Yeah.
I laugh about it, but it's really not a joke. I mean, yeah, I understand like where you're coming from as far as like that tinderbox powder keg. There's so many things that they can be in that danger area of ideology and you know, political leanings, and just already just we've seen it in a conversation that shouldn't even be in the political realm of vaccines and even just an idea of COVID. And yet, what has that done? It's like it tears people apart still.
Yeah, there's a polarization within
Right.
humanity, and yeah, so that's, when I take a look and I'm like, oh, what's the future have to hold, and stuff. And so then I think that a balanced approach would be, okay, so Steve, what are your steps in, filtering through? And so I think it's, eyes wide open for, meeting new acquaintances, building new relationships. I think the more and more the country opens up, and people in Iowa or Michigan would be like, well, hey, the country is open up. I'm like, hey, we're still wearing masks, in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So I like there's a lot of different approaches that are taking place and going, and the things that happen with that. So, man, I hate to be a wet blanket on, for everybody, and yet there's a part of me that says, there are other things that will be enjoyed. I mean, there's going to be a baby Kobo born in March, and I mean, so that'll be cool, and and then there's these other things, and and so faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. I think the sacred texts say, and so what is a motion and what is a move for what it means for us to be able to love each other, love one another, and just to be able to, if I was going to put on a preacher's hat, is to live out, not just by the words that I say, but how do I show in my life that I'm willing to love others. And when you live in a restricted, we go wrap that back around to being an introvert who's living a monistic lifestyle. I mean, how does that happen? Like, there's where what's different and how it changed, and to do that, what does that look like? And so I don't know if that means that I have to like start thinking through life in a way that puts me more out there than what I'm willing to do. I don't know. There's so many, lots of unanswered questions for me. And so.
That's okay.
Well, I'm glad we can sit with the mess of it because it's not very comfortable.
No. So what are you considering out there when you're looking, forward? And yes, we still have a little bit of time in 2021 still. We're not trying to zoom us forward, but it's a great time to start considering it. What are you thinking about with looking forward? What are going to be on your agenda for looking at 2022? And I think it's great to consider with us as well, what that looks like in your own life.
Well, and I think in the practice of the church, Advent was considered a dark season, where it's a time of reflection, being able to come into the birth of Redeemer Savior.
But yeah.
And so like, it's not like, oh, it's a new year, spring has sprung and there's new life, or, whatever. I mean, but this is the time post Halloween, after thinking through and remembering about the ancestors that have gone on before us, not only the things that they provided and they gave, but there's the other part of now we head into the dark months. And in these dark months, as winter comes, it is a time for solitude and reflection, and to let us gain wisdom from our past year, and let us prepare for the things that we would determine to do. For instance, I mean, it's not all dark and dreary. My phase 2 at the Pottery Studio is to be able to be in art shows next year. So I'm looking up. There's a promotions group that has what does it take to get into an art show. You go and take that class, and then you learn about that stuff. And then this week on Tuesday, I was taking pictures of pottery so that I could be able to finish up the website and then start building an online portfolio for a juried, people who get into art shows. Usually there's a jury that says yay or nay to whether or not that stuff can come in, and stuff. So, like, those are parts of what that looks like. And yet I think that my life deserves an ample question of, okay, that was something that was thought of in 21. Now, what are you going to think about, as far as, do I commit more energy to writing that book that I started? Do I put myself out there where, like, hey, if I really am good at teaching people about leading other people, do I make myself available to be able to teach other people and leading people? And what does that look like? And how does that happen? Right on down the road. So, what I'm not planning on doing, but I'm more than willing to if I need to, is I'm not planning on getting a job at a gas station. Mm-hmm. I'm not planning on flipping burgers at Bebop's. And I really appreciate the people that did that the other day. But, it just is one of those things where, how do you use your time that you do have? Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
There it is.
Now that's episode 2 for us today, but it's episode 7 for you tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope everybody's enjoyed the conversation. I think it's, and again, this is, a little bit, looking at our timer and saying, all right, this is about where it feels natural. I mean, we could go into 7 other topics right now. I mean, obviously, that if you've listened to the podcast. But I think today what we're going to do is wrap it up there and we've still given you plenty of things for you to consider and think about and enter into that conversation, whether you with someone else or just for you to start considering or pondering for your own. So
wrap it up.
Wrapping it up, boxing it up, putting a little bow on it, and saying, thanks for being here, everybody.
Thanks a lot, everybody.